Hello, this is the Bluegrass Blues podcast. I'm Amy.
And I'm Jesse.
Today's April 21st, 2025. So, Jesse, what are we doing?
Well, we're doing a podcast that involves Kentucky, and it's not only Kentucky politics. It's going to be Kentucky politics, but first of all, let's explain what the name is. We call ourselves the Bluegrass Blues Podcast. And the reason we're doing that isn't because we're going to be playing bluegrass music here. So I'm sorry for all you bluegrass fans. That's not our purpose. What we're going to be doing is talking about issues in Kentucky because it's the bluegrass state. And we're calling ourselves the Bluegrass Blues because in terms of the political spectrum, we're on the blue side as opposed to being on the red side. So you put them together, you have the Bluegrass Blues. And if you're listening to this, this is a podcast. So we're going to talk about who we are first, why we're doing this, and maybe we'll bring up a few topics as we go along. So Amy, who are you anyway, and why are you here?
Hey, so Jesse and I go way back, but basically I am an economic inclusion expert. And what that means is over the years, I've had the good fortune of working in every state and Puerto Rico and in Native American country to ensure that all of us have access to wealth building opportunities. And it's been really gratifying. I started a Department of Transportation paratransit system in New York City in the 80s because the community with disabilities sued the state government for not having affordable, accessible public transportation. And I was on the team that launched Access-A-Ride, which is a transportation system now that they can take and go to the opera, go to a park, not just to dialysis appointments the way that they had to before. And then since then, I have been doing this work. And unfortunately, when Trump was elected the first time, he cut this program that I was working for. It was called Assets for Independence. And it was a fabulous grant program, very small, just about a $25 million program in the federal government in the Office of Community Services, Administration for Children and Families in the Health and Human Services Department. And what it did was I went out and worked with municipalities and state governments and nonprofits and tribal entities. And we did these match savings programs that got people saving, get out of debt, and we would match their savings so they could buy a house, buy a reliable vehicle, go to college or trade school, any kind of post-secondary education, or start a business. And it worked, people saved, they got out of debt, they started paying taxes, they got off of public benefits, and then, just crazily, Trump eliminated the grant program. So then I launched what's called a CDFI, Community Development Financial Institution, in Louisville, and basically Louisville is terribly underinvested in providing capital to historically under-resourced communities because of systemic racism and redlining. And this CDFI was the first one headquartered in Louisville and got capital to primarily Black and brown small business owners, but also helped Black homeowners stay in their homes and not have their property taxes sold to third parties and then displaced from a $500 property tax bill that they couldn't pay or didn't even know was due. And now I'm affected by Trump too because he's going after the CDFI fund, which is in the U.S. Treasury. And the reason the CDFI fund exists is because banks were not lending fairly to minority communities, and they redlined. They literally drew a red line around census tracts that were low income and primarily minority communities, and they either didn't lend or they charged egregiously higher interest rates to them. And thus, these communities have never had access to affordable capital, and that's what a CDFI does. So I'm having trouble in this field right now because, they're decimating the field because they obviously don't care about Black and brown communities or people with low incomes, because all of that is now labeled under the terrible acronym DEI. And people are suffering, and I'm kind of suffering too because I don't get to do this great work in partnership with the community. But I get to do this podcast with you, Jesse.
Well, one thing I was thinking was when we were in New York, we were about in New York at the same time. Like
Right.
I was living in Staten Island, you were living in Brooklyn or
Manhattan. I was the best person in your wedding.
That's right. And didn't you work on Wall Street, or weren't you involved in some Wall Street investment firm?
I did. I worked at Moody's Investors Service for over 3 years, and we rated municipal bonds. I was the lead analyst for the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And what I discovered, this is probably my favorite thing, the thing I'm most proud of professionally, is in Kentucky, Moody's and the other Standards and Poor's and Fitch, they were rating Kentucky school bonds erroneously. And by that I mean they were penalizing property poor school districts in Kentucky because they thought they would default on their loans and they were riskier. But in fact, as a result of CARA, the Kentucky Education Reform Act, the state has an intercept. And the intercept says, okay, school district, if you're having difficulty paying your debt, we will intercept and prevent a default. The state comes in and prevents a default. And I brought this policy up to the powers that be at Moody's Investor Service, and all of a sudden, every single Kentucky school district got a minimum of an A bond rating. And some of these had really been low bond ratings, which means they had to pay really high interest on these bonds. And as a result of this policy, schools all over the Commonwealth, sewage had been running into hollers. There were all these portable facilities with no air conditioning. And if you go around the Commonwealth of Kentucky now, you see beautiful schools with heating and air conditioning and indoor plumbing, and with environments now that can support really good educational outcomes. And I'm really proud of that.
Well, see, that's the thing about Wall Street. Everyone thinks that Wall Street doesn't care about anyone other than billionaires. And there are things that can be done on Wall Street with people with integrity that actually help people in the rest of the country. So, it's we can't put a broad brush on everybody being evil on Wall Street. There is this difference between Wall Street and Main Street, but there are people on Wall Street who are actually trying to do some decent things. And I don't want to be an apologist for Wall Street because that would be wrong. It's not the thing to do.
I wanted to share just one more little tidbit about myself. I am a boomeranger. I grew up in Louisville, and I moved back in 1997, and I got very involved. I've always been a community organizer and an activist. And in 2006, I ran for state representative in House District 48, which is out in the east end of Jefferson County. And at that time, no Democrats had won that seat. It was very red. And there was a guy, Dr. Bob DeWee.
Right.
And he was a nice guy. He apparently was a good doctor. A lot of people really knew him, and he was a terrible legislator. And I ran, and this is after he hadn't had anyone run against him for 8 years, which, in a democracy, you really want to see both parties like flourishing and people running for office and, bringing up things that they think will help the district. And I went out there and I raised more money, I think, that year than any other person running for state rep, about $100,000, which was a lot of money in 2006, and really made him work for the first time to not be all over the Commonwealth campaigning for other people, but to actually show up in our community and our district and talk about his policies to people. So I ran a really good race, and I was close for a first race. I did lose. The numbers just weren't there. But here's the thing. When we run, especially us women, when we show up, we can be really inspiring, and we speak about families and issues that are important to us. And now in that district, we've had a Democratic woman in the seat, and we also have a state senator out there, Karen Berg, who's also a physician, who's a Democrat, and her district, the senator district, goes out into Oldham County and I think Trimble, and that was very red. And so, when we run for office and we show up for our community and we speak about the kinds of things that people care about, other people follow in our footsteps. And now you see, very good Democratic legislators in Eastern Jefferson County. That just wasn't the case in the early 2000s.
Okay, we're going to make a transition because I'm going to talk about what I do. But one of the things you raised with me years ago, maybe months ago, was when you ran, you didn't get the endorsement of the local paper. And you want to tell that story?
Yeah. Yeah, so when I ran, I did go in front of the Courier-Journal, and I spoke about what my policy issues, and I really had a groundswell of support. I was working really hard. I had this finance background, so I understood finances. I understood, poverty, and we're one of the poorest states. My father is a periodontist, and we have the most adult toothlessness of any state. So I did all kinds of research about what we need in this state, and ran a really good campaign. And Bob DeWeese was endorsed by the local paper, the Courier-Journal. And I found out later, actually, that there were campaigns, even John Yarmouth's campaigns, but Jerry Abramson, who was mayor then, they did not want to tip the apple cart. They did not want me to win because Bob DeWeese, had supported Jerry Abramson in becoming mayor after the Metro Louisville government was formed. And I didn't know any of this, but the paper was in on it too, and they had to endorse some Republicans because, of course, the liberal media bias and everything, and I did not get the endorsement that I deserved.
Okay, well, since we're going to talk about journalism, I am a journalist. I've been a journalist for almost 50 years. I retired recently. My last job was at the San Francisco Chronicle, where I was director of culture and operations, which meant that I was overseeing one of the departments involved race and equity, and the other department involved transformation, which involved the economics of San Francisco, especially post-pandemic, because if you look at San Francisco's property values now, they've completely crashed, where billion-dollar buildings are going for a couple of $100 million now these days. But I was there for 3 years, and I'm going to go through my whole journalism past. When I graduated from college, I went to Ohio Wesleyan. My first job was in South Florida. I was at the Ocala paper that was part of the New York Times chain. And I was a reporter there, covered just whatever they told me to cover. And I was there for a couple of years. Then I moved on to another newspaper in Florida, down in Fort Lauderdale. That was the Sun Sentinel. And I was specifically a feature writer there. So I wrote features for, couldn't have been more than a year. And at a certain point, I was at my desk. I'd written a story about a woman who collected thimbles, and I thought, oh my God, I got to do something else. And just about that, within days, someone called me from Pennsylvania, because I had met a person who was the New York Times correspondent for Florida papers in Florida while I was in Ocala. And he gave me a call from Pennsylvania because he went to join the office of Governor Dick Thornburgh, who's a Republican. And he said, do you want to come up and work for Dick Thornburgh? And I thought, well, do I want to cover thimbles for the rest of my life, or do I want to go into politics? So I joined the Thornburgh administration as an assistant press secretary. Now, Republicans then are not what they are now. Let's get that clear. I had no qualms about working for Dick Thornburgh. I thought he was an honorable man. He did really good things for Pennsylvania. He was coming out of, well, he actually won his election because the Democratic governor was just plagued with corruption scandals. And One of the things they told me when I went up to interview for the job in Pennsylvania was that if you work for Dick Thornburg, he will not embarrass you. And he didn't embarrass me. He was a very good governor. Unfortunately, he wasn't picked for the vice presidential campaign when George Bush was running.
Why was that, Jesse? Who was picked?
Dan Quayle, of all people.
Boy.
And we all remember Dan Quayle was like the original George Bush, I guess, George Bush II. Because it was around the time, and if you remember politics back in that era, we were coming off the Reagan administration. There was this demand for true conservative values and, mourning in America and all this other stuff. And then George Bush came along, and he was seen as, this is the first George Bush, HW. He was seen as one of these Ivy League snob preppy types. And, it's one of the things I got out of politics was I got the feeling that people didn't want to vote for anyone who they thought was smarter than they were. Dick Thornburg was smarter than most people, and George Bush I was smarter than most people. So how do you counter that? How do you not appear to be like an elite snob?
Do you make America great again?
Well, that was later, and that's a different story altogether, because if you look in that case, that's a billionaire saying that. So, but in the George Bush the first was not a billionaire. He was a millionaire, definitely, but he needed someone who didn't give an Ivy League air to every political decision. So he picked Dan Quayle. I still don't understand why he did that, because I understand in the fact that people thought Dan Quayle was an idiot when he was running, and we all remember the potato incident. And if you don't remember it, because I'm sure there are possibly young people listening to this and don't even know who Dan Quayle was, but Dan Quayle was in this classroom, like this elementary school classroom, and it was a spelling contest. And someone asked to spell potato. And so the kids spelled potato correctly, and Quayle pointed out that, no, it has an E at the end. And it's like, oh, okay, no, it doesn't. But that was probably the highlight of Dan Quayle's vice presidential term, that and attacking Murphy Brown. And for all you young folks out there, Murphy Brown was a television show about a reporter. Was it Candace Bergen?
Yes,
yeah.
Candace Bergen.
So Candace Bergen was the star, and she had this season where she was an unwed mother. And Dan Quayle was just talking about the lack of values of Murphy Brown, and people were thinking, well, that's a fictional character. What are you talking about? But that's Dan Quayle in a nutshell. So anyway, I worked for Dick Thornburg for a few years. I have no qualms about doing that. I think he should have been vice president instead of Dan Quayle. I think he could have been president if he had gotten that position. But that's the way it went. He wasn't picked. He eventually, he ran for Senate. He lost to, it was during the Reagan recession, I guess, or no, it was after that. But he ran for Senate in Pennsylvania and lost that race. So in the end, he ended up as Attorney General for George Bush the first. And so after I left politics, I went to grad school in New York, went to Columbia University, which is now sort of like caving to the Trump administration. Anyway, I got my master's degree there. And my job after that, and this is where the Louisville connection comes in, I came to Louisville after grad school. And I worked at the Courier-Journal. This was in the Bingham era, where the Courier-Journal...
The golden era.
Yeah, it was. The Courier-Journal was a great newspaper, and everyone would admit that. When I was in school, you'd look at the top 10 papers in America, and the Courier was always in the top 10. And it's because the Bingham family was dedicated to improving the quality of life in Kentucky.
They were from here. They knew
yeah.
this place.
Right. They weren't a corporation, and so they weren't like these people, I think, it's based in Virginia, and they weren't like these suits in another state who knew nothing about what this part of the country was. And, they helped build Louisville to be a world class city at the time. And it had a great editor in David Hopp, who was a University of Kentucky graduate. I think he got either a Fulbright or a Rhodes Scholarship or something like that. And he was a liberal. Everyone knows that. It was like the big criticism of the Courier Journal was that it was run by this liberal. But David was from this state. He grew up in coal country. When he one of the stories about David is that he had a lump of coal that his father gave him, and his father gave it to him just to remind him where he came from. And I don't think he ever forgot that. But then Gannett comes along, and I was here for the Gannett takeover, and it was not, in my view and in the view of the people who were at the Courier at the time, that was not a great thing to happen. We knew the Gannett's reputation for stripping down, just cost cutting, and it was not considered the quality news organization. And it's, I can't say it's better than it was back then. I think it's worse, but it's now one of the prominent news organizations in the country. And if you look at Gannett, you look at the regular job cuts. Staff has been slashed. I applied for a job here in Kentucky after, well, I'll go through the rest of my journalism career later, but I did apply for a job here twice. One was for an editorial page editor job, and the other was for the executive editor job. And when I applied for the executive editor job, which was not too long ago, there were probably 80 people on staff at the time, and last time I looked, there were probably 60 at most, maybe 50, which, that's a huge chunk of what the paper used to be. Because when I was here with the Bingham era, we didn't have one newspaper, we had two. We had the Louisville Courier Journal and the Louisville Times, and the Times was the afternoon paper, the Courier Journal was the morning paper. It covered the whole state. It had bureaus everywhere, and we were getting feeds from all parts of the country.
Jesse, why didn't you get either job?
Well, I don't know. Well, when I did the editorial job interview, I felt I just get the feeling that they didn't want to make waves. So
they didn't want to make waves in an editorial
right
department.
Yeah, right. Like it was they still know, well, we're in a red state. If you offend people, then you're going to lose all these readers. So let's just stay down the middle and be kind of wishy-washy about everything, which is not good if you're a news organization. If you don't stand for anything, then why would anybody want to look at you to begin with? So I didn't get the job then. I didn't get the job as the executive editor, but let me talk about my other journalism path before that. After I left the Courier Journal, where I was like a news editor, I was started as a copy editor. I was running Sunday nights. I did oversaw the Sunday night publication. So the Saturday night publication for the Sunday paper, which was the bigger paper. And after a few years, I started looking around, and I got an offer from the Wall Street Journal. And David called me into his office when that happened, and he said, why are you leaving? We had plans for you. And I said, well, it's the Wall Street Journal. And it's like, that was one of the papers when I was younger. I thought, that's the place to go. That is a quality newspaper. I don't think it's a quality newspaper as much as it used to be, but it was a quality newspaper at the time. It was it covered some of the great events of the late 20th, early 21st century. It was there when the market collapsed. Was it
2008?
No, it was back in the 90s,
Okay.
even before then. And they won a Pulitzer Prize for that. And I was there for 9/11. We won a Pulitzer Prize for that. And the thing that was the most fascinating about it was that the World Trade Center was directly across the street from the Wall Street Journal building. And people in the office had to run for their lives. And this is like literally, they were watching people jump off the World Trade Center. They were watching people die. And it was a very emotional time. It was just devastating for everyone, but we got a paper out, even though our building had essentially been blown up in the terrorist attack. But that was probably the most important story I ever was involved in, and I really am happy with the work I did. I'm happy with the work with what everyone did. I think it was recognized that what we did was amazing. But so I worked at the Journal. At the time, I was the director of the copy desk. So I was responsible for editing, having people who edited the domestic journal, the European journal, and the Asian journal. So after 9/11, about a year or two later, I got transferred to go to Brussels to work as an assistant managing editor at the Wall Street Journal Europe. And eventually I became the managing editor there. And then I retired after a few years. And I had reasons for retiring because I was at the Wall Street Journal when Rupert Murdoch took over. And that was, it's like Gannett taking over. Okay, this is not good, so I don't really want to work for this organization anymore. And it was one of these deals where I worked a year, got a year's pay for staying the year, and then I retired. And I thought I was kind of done with journalism, but within months I got a call from the Washington Post. And the people who were running the Post then were my former bosses at the Wall Street Journal. And they said, want to work in Washington? And it's like, sure, why not? This is like another great newspaper, the Washington Post. It's up there with the Wall Street Journal. And
Was it one of those Marty Baron?
it was, I got there before the Marty Baron era because the guy who hired me was Marcus Broccoli. And he was my boss when I was in Europe, he was the head of the newspaper, the Wall Street Journal in New York, and we got along very well. I used to edit Marcus when he was a reporter. He liked my work, and he knew what I did at the Journal as the copy chief, so he got me into Washington as the copy chief there, and so we were, editing stories. Just doing, covering all kinds of things. We won Pulitzer Prizes. Again, one of the things that I have are a couple of copies of Pulitzer Prizes in my office here because I could say I was part of a team that got these awards. So I stayed at the Post for almost 10 years. I was at the Journal for more than 20 years. And at the Post, I was there when Jeff Bezos took over. So you see this trend here where wherever I go, someone takes over. And
Not someone, or I guess corporations are people now, right?
Oh, that's what Mitt Romney said when he was running for president.
Citizens United.
Yeah, but Jeff Bezos was, at the time, Jeff Bezos let the Post do what it was supposed to do. It was covering news. We were the ones who broke the Snowden story about the surveillance that the government was doing on all Americans. Got a Pulitzer Prize for that one. And that was the Marty Baron era. And Marty, for those who are aware of the journalism world, if you go watch the movie Spotlight, that was about the Boston Globe covering the priest pedophile situation in Boston. They were the Pulitzer Prize winners for that story. And Marty was in charge of the Boston Globe when that happened. And if you see the movie Spotlight, Liev Schreiber is Marty in the movie, and that's exactly how Marty is. We just sat there and we had like a group viewing of the movie when it first came out in Washington, and we watched the mannerisms, and that's Marty Baron. So he's that kind of guy. But he eventually left the Post. He retired, and not long after that, I retired. That was my second retirement. And, airplanes going overhead. And after my second retirement, I thought, okay, I'm done working. I'm not going to work anymore. And then I got a call from the San Francisco paper, and they said, "Hey, you want to come out here and work with us?" And I thought, well, I've been in Europe. I've been throughout the East Coast. I've lived in the Midwest. I've never lived on the West Coast, so let's go out to California. And I've been at the San Francisco Chronicle for, what is it, 3 years? Yeah, 3 years. And I retired this year. Really great newspaper. I have really good things to say about it. But like all news organizations, it's been devastated by job cuts, by, just the lack of commitment to journalism by the public and by the corporate operators. I'll give Hearst credit for maintaining some kind of integrity for its papers, but job cuts are inevitable in these days.
What was your job there, Jesse?
Director of Culture and Operations. I think I said that already.
No, you didn't say that, but
Okay,
is
yeah,
that kind of DEI-ish?
Oh, it is definitely DEI-ish.
Oh, boy.
Because that's the covering race inequity is one thing. And, everyone thinks that San Francisco is this great beacon of liberal values. But when you really look at it, it really is very discriminatory. One of the things that struck me when I first got there was there are no black people in San Francisco. If you go around there, the only black people you see are either homeless or on some kind of drugs. It's just because the cost of living in San Francisco is outrageous. In order to buy a cheap house, a fixer-upper is $1 million. How many houses can you buy in Louisville for $1 million? Prices are going up here, but you can get a couple for that amount of money. And the city is also getting very old. If you look around San Francisco, there are hardly any children. You see more dogs than children in the city. And it's also, it's like the haven for tech bros. So it's that whole culture that's different. And, again, they say that they're liberals and all this stuff, but I've seen these proposals that they made for building new neighborhoods, like these enclosed sort of like cells within the city. And one of the things about the designs that they give, or they give like some kind of view of what it's going to be, some AI generated thing where you see people smiling in new buildings and all this other stuff, and flowers and trees and all those things. But I pointed out to our editors and staff that if you look at these drawings, there are no black people, and that was definitely a conscious decision by the tech bros there, who just, they don't register minorities as being of any worth there, and no one can live there. It's like if you're I don't know how you can make a minimum wage and survive in San Francisco, and the minimum wage in San Francisco is probably $18 to $20, but.
Jesse, when I was doing some anti-poverty work in San Francisco, I always talk to my Lyft drivers, when I go places if I'm not using public transportation. And my Lyft driver was a Latinx person from Fresno. Mm-hmm. And he would go to San Francisco and just drive for a week, like almost 24 hours a day for a week. And he would stay in a boarding house for that week with a whole lot of other, people who couldn't afford rent. And then he'd go back to Fresno for 2 weeks, and that's where his family was.
Right.
And he'd do whatever he was doing, in Fresno, probably not driving Lyft. And that's how his life was structured. There was absolutely no way that he could live in San Francisco.
But it's not only him. Like a school teacher can't live in San Francisco, or a cop can't live in San Francisco, or public servants are not able to live there because it costs too much. You have to have millions or billions of dollars to survive there. So how did I get there? Okay, that's another story. But I was commuting pretty much. Like I've been living in Louisville for 18 years now, just between working for the Courier Journal and since retiring from the Washington Post. No, from the Wall Street Journal, we moved here to Louisville after I retired from the Wall Street Journal because my wife is from the area. She was born here. She was raised down in Lebanon Junction in Bullitt County, and it was time to go home. So she followed me around the world, and so I followed her here. And so while I was working in Washington, I was commuting between here and Washington, have a place there. While I was in San Francisco, I commuted between here and San Francisco. Couldn't find a cheap apartment, but fortunately they paid me enough to stay there. And but now I'm retired, and now I'm retired in Louisville, and now we're doing this podcast. And so I guess now we lead to the question, why are we doing this?
Yeah, I mean, so I have my reasons as someone who is very rooted in this community and has a lot of, I have family here, I have so many friends, and I'm so committed to social and racial justice. And what I want to do with this podcast, Jesse, is to, while you talk about media and how the media is failing us with this incredibly fascistic administration that's tearing us apart and creating so much fear and discord everywhere, I want to lift up, what people are doing in the Commonwealth to fight the good fight against this fascistic administration, and what we're doing to fight the super Republican majority in the House and Senate in Frankfurt, which really they overrode all the governor's vetoes that were going to protect, clean air and all kinds of things, worker safety, reproductive freedom, et cetera, which we'll go into another time. So I'm really here to give voice about, people look at a red state, especially from the coast, and it's like flyover country, right? Oh, red state, they're monoliths. It's absolutely not true. And in fact, people like us can really make a difference in a place like Kentucky because we can build community really well, we can organize really well, we lift our voices really well, and then sometimes we get to elect someone really good like Andy Beshear, who's our Democratic governor in the red state, and who's really widely beloved because people see beyond party with this person. He really cares about the people in Kentucky, and it just comes out in every way. So that's one of the reasons I'm doing it.
And I'm doing it just because my family is here, and you have to care about the environment your family is in. I have 2 grandchildren. They're going to be going to schools here. Their mom and dad went to U of L, University of Louisville, for people who aren't from the area. But this is now home, and this has been my home for 18 years, even though I've been traveling around the country doing other jobs at other news organizations. But when it comes down to it, I am a Kentucky resident because I vote here, I pay taxes here, I care about what happens in the city. I look around and see things that could be better. And it's not only the city, it's the rest of the state. We're calling ourselves the Bluegrass Blues podcast, not because we're going to do music, although we will have references to music and arts and other things like that and sports as we go along, but because we're in the bluegrass and we are blue in a red state. So that's how Bluegrass Blues comes along.
Well, and also the blues, singing the blues. I think some of us are pretty blue right now.
Right.
Some people are hopeless. I was just in my book club, and the women in my book club felt hopeless, and they were like, "What brings you hope?" And so although I am disgusted with these inhumane, illegal, corrupt policies that are being shoved down our throats and our livelihoods, I do have hope. And the hope is in you all. It's in the people of the Commonwealth and of this country. And we outnumber the oligarchs. So we're going to step up and we're going to make good trouble.
But we also have to raise questions on, okay, we outnumber the oligarchs, we outnumber the oligarchs, we outnumber the billionaires and the millionaires. But why do we vote for them? Why is this state used to be a Democratic state, and it used to be solid blue. And over the years with, I guess Mitch McConnell's responsible for pretty much all of it, but the state has gone from solid blue to solid red. And, Andy Bashir is the governor. Yes, he is the Democrat, but yeah, I have to raise the question of, if Andy didn't run against a black guy in the last election, would he have won? I think that's a legitimate question to raise, because, I would never vote for Daniel Cameron, and he's a black guy, and let's get that out of the way. I am a black guy too, but it just, to me, it just seems like if he had a different opponent in the election would have been a lot closer, and it would have just, I think he still would have won, but I think it would have been by a razor thin margin.
Well, and in future podcasts, we're actually going to talk about the media and how the media, particularly Fox News, has, basically spread fear and xenophobia and sexism and racism, and made people arm themselves, to the teeth, because they're so afraid of the other. And the media has really lit this fire. Yes, I thought Mitch McConnell was the worst person in the country, maybe the world, but really the country, particularly during President Obama's terms, just obstructing every single judge and justice that Obama brought up. And, now, what did he do with Rand Paul recently that was like, we're against tariffs.
Tariffs, yeah.
Yeah. Of course, tariffs are terrible, and they're awful for the bourbon industry, which, we have the bourbon trail here, and, whereas Colorado's the marijuana state, we are the bourbon state. And so when it starts hitting your pocketbooks and, hitting the shareholders' quarterly reports, we've got to speak up. But we're certainly not going to speak up for any of the immigrants that ICE is coming to take out of their homes, even though they're at the backside of the track getting ready for the Kentucky Derby while the world comes to Louisville. And they're picking our crops and all the things. No, we don't care about the immigrants, but what we do care about is our own bottom lines.
Well, everyone cares about the bottom line. And, having been a Wall Street Journal editor, there is something to be said for watching the bottom line, but there's also something to be said about treating your workers fairly and treating your residents fairly, because, if you want to appeal to people and if you want to stay in office, you appeal to everybody. You just don't appeal to what I consider a cult, this cult of personality. Some of the things that are happening today are not that much different than what happens in North Korea. And, that's their pals. Our president and the head of North Korea are pals, write love letters to each other. It's kind of embarrassing.
Yeah.
But, it's those kinds of things that we'd like to look at over the course of our podcast. Oh, we also have a website. It's the bluegrassbluespodcast.com. So we will be posting things there. We'll be talking about the things we post, and we are going to really try to keep in touch with what's going on in Kentucky. We hope to get people to just share their stories with us. We'd like to hear what's going on out there. But again, this is our first attempt at a podcast. We'll see how it goes. We'll see if there's any interest. We're getting close to 45 minutes, which we thought we weren't going to be able to do, but we're here. So
thanks for listening in.
Thanks. Yep. And
we encourage you to share this with your friends on social media. And we're probably going to air, we're thinking about airing every couple weeks. And in the meantime, writing blog posts at thebluegrassbluespodcast.com.
Right. So like and subscribe and all those other fun things that the YouTube people say. And I think we will be on YouTube, and we hope to get on to Apple Music and Spotify. So, and we will post this to our website as well. So keep an eye out for us, and we hope to see you soon.
Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Special thanks to John Chamberlain for our closing music.